Welcome students. Welcome again to my another tutorial on micro and macroevolution. Before understanding the terms, let me clear you what biological evolution or evolution is. Biological evolution is simply a change in the frequency of one or more genes through time within the gene pool of a population or populations of a species through generations. Although the changes in gene frequencies occur gradually, and gene frequencies may remain constant for long periods of time before they again change in response to changes in the environment, which means the rate of change in gene frequencies can increase and sometimes even decrease, but the basic process of frequency change continues, which leads to evolution. Evolution is often considered in two categories, that are microevolution and macroevolution. The microevolution obviously implies a small amount of change, and macroevolution a larger amount of change. The difficulty, however, comes in deciding where the boundary between the two shall fall, whether or not they reflect the same process, or whether or not the dichotomy is into micro and macroevolution is even useful or valid. Studies concluded by various biologists with living organisms are limited to their own lifespan and perhaps the lifespan of their students. Even if they work with short-lived organisms such as the annual plants or the fruit flies, they can observe evolution for only a limited number of generations, which is a fine-grained or in microevolutionary scale. In contrast, studies concluded by paleontologists are limited only by the fossil records, which extends back a billion years or even more, which is of course coarse-grained or on a macroevolutionary scale. Now, let us understand what microevolution is. Microevolution refers to changes in the allelic or gene frequencies in a population over short time scale. Remember, it's a short time scale. Microevolution introduces changes at the smallest scale and modifies the genetic equilibrium in the gene pool of a Mendelian population from one generation to the another. Microevolution operates at the population level. It causes the gene pools of closely related population of species to diverge and contribute to the origin of new species or speciation. It forms the basis for all large-scale evolutionary changes or macroevolution, which means microevolution is a way towards a larger evolution, which is the macroevolution. Now again, apparently what happens is that individual organisms interact with their environment and with other organisms. Each organism's trait affects its survival and its reproductive success in a given environment. It means natural selection acts on individuals, but the evolutionary impact of natural selection is apparent in the changes reflected in the gene pool of the population over the time. For example, a population of seed-eating medium-sized ground finch, that is Geospiza fortis, living on Isle Daphne, major of Galapagos Island, was exposed to prolonged drought in 1977. Of the population of almost 1200 birds, only 180 survived. And also, most of the surviving birds had larger and deeper beak and could feed on large and hard seeds, which were available during the drought period. In subsequent generations, the number of finches with large and deep beaks increases manifold over the finches which had small beak and which fed on small and soft seeds. Interestingly, it shows that during drought period, the beaks of the individual finches did not become large or more deep. Rather, what happened was that the average beak depth in the population increased over time because more deep beaked finches survived and produced offsprings that than the shallow beaked individuals. Natural selection acts on individuals, but evolutionary changes are reflected in the characteristics of population and more precisely as the change of the allelic frequencies in the gene pool of the population. The mechanism to the microevolution. There are basic four forces that change allelic frequency, okay, which are responsible for microevolution. And these basic forces are gene mutations, recombinations and non-random matings, gene flow or gene migration, genetic drift, and sometimes natural selection. Coming to the first one, that is the gene mutation. The primary mechanism for microevolution in the gene pool of a population are the formation of new alleles by mutation. Spontaneous mutations in the replication of DNA cause permanent alterations of the organism's DNA, creating new alleles instantly. Mutations may arise by exposure to physical or even chemical mutations such as ultraviolet light. They also occur constantly at a very low rate, even under normal conditions. Some of these mutations are heritable and they are passed to the future generation. Here in the example, for your easy understanding, you may see that the population of green beetles with green genes suddenly mutates to produce a brown gene. Although the mutation is rare, this process alone cannot account for a big change in the allelic frequency over one generation. Now, though mutations occurs at a very low rate and very few of them are beneficial or adaptive, they create new alleles. They are the only means by which new information or character comes into being, because the new proteins produced by the mutant alleles can modify the form or capabilities of an organism. When a new allele proves to be advantageous, the number of organisms with the new allele increases through successive generations. Why? Because it's because of the successful survival and reproduction. Since mutations are the only process that creates new alleles, it is the only mechanism that increases genetic variability in the genome of individuals, as like the brown beetles shown in the example. Now coming to the second type, okay, which is gene flow or gene migration. Allele frequency in a population can also change with mating that can occur due to interbreeding between organisms of two different populations. As in the illustration, some beetles with brown genes immigrated from another population. So some beetles carrying the green genes also they immigrated. Okay, this is called the gene flow or gene migration. Gene flow means movement of alleles from one population to another. Okay, such movements occur by the immigration or sometimes immigration of individuals into or out of the population. When genes flow from one population to another, the genetic variation in one population increases many folds, okay, but variation between this population decreases because of exchange of alleles among their members. As in the diagram, immigration of brown beetles led to the increase of gene frequency or allelic frequency of brown genes. Okay, now coming to another one, which is genetic drift. Genetic drift is the chance alteration of allelic frequencies in the gene pool of a population. Due to genetic drift, the allele frequencies drift up and down randomly over time and can lead to the fixation or even loss of alleles without their adaptive values. Genetic drift exerts tremendous effects on the gene pool of smaller populations, though it occurs even in the large populations. When the beetles reproduce just by random luck, more brown genes than the green genes ended up in the offspring. In the diagram at the right, brown genes occur slightly more frequently in the offspring, that is 29%, than in the parent generation, that is 25 percentage. The large population, statistically defined as a greater than 100 reproducing pairs, are proportionately less affected by isolated random events. Two types of genetic drift act when a large population modifies into a small population, okay, which is known as fragmentation effect or pioneer effect. Okay, again coming back to the two different types, okay, to two different types of genetic drift. Okay, the first one is the fragmentation effect or bottleneck effect. The bottleneck effect of a genetic drift is seen in the change of the allelic frequencies in a population, which suffers from chance reduction in its size. As in the example, extreme reduction in the size of the large population may arise by natural happenings such as drought, hurricanes, floods, fire, or even man-made events such as habitat destruction or even overhunting. The small surviving group of few individuals which serves as a sample, their gene pool might have all the alleles present in the parent population or lacking some alleles. In case the survivors lack certain alleles, the future population grown from the survivors or the sample will also have allele frequency different from that of a parent population but similar to that of the survivors. The second of kind is the pioneer effect or the founder's effect. Founder's effect occurs when a small subpopulation breaks away from the large parent population and migrates to a new area and establishes a new population. This kind of individual that colonize a new territory are called the founder members, and their gene pool becomes the founding gene pool of a new population. The gene pool of new population will become much different over generations due to again genetic drift, which results in fixing some alleles and losing some another. Genetic drift tends to make the population gene pool homozygous. Such populations sometimes retain harmful genes. Moreover, homozygous populations have extinction threat because they may not surviving in the changed environment. Now coming to the another one, that is natural selection. Okay, natural selection is the process in which organisms with different adaptations to their environment are favored and are passed on to the offspring with greater frequency. These adaptations are introduced in the gene pool of the populations by gene mutations and recombinations. As a result, the offspring of a population are found to be different genetically as well as phenotypically. This changed population or descent population is the product of microevolution. Changes produced by mutations and recombinations may be beneficial or may not be. But since the changed genotype interacts with the environment, only those changes which increases the rate of reproduction or the fitness of the organism directly or indirectly becomes more numerous in the population. From this, it could be inferred that the variations of adaptive value are preserved and encouraged by natural selection. As seen here, beetles with brown genes escaped predation and survived to reproduce more frequently than the beetles with green genes, so that more brown genes got to the next generation, which was favored by the environment or was a process of natural selection. Now coming to the examples of microevolution, one of the most common examples, is the dog variability. When bred for certain traits, dogs become different and distinctive. This is a common example of microevolution. Changes in size, shape and color or minor genetic alterations with the population or below the species level. So remember, what happens in case of dog is that there is a change, a phenotypic change which is occurring only within the population level. Or dog is not changing into something different, which means that the evolution is something which is happening within the population level or which is occurring below the species level. Another example of microevolution is the size of the house sparrows, which was introduced in Northern America in 1852. These sparrow populations in the north have developed very large body than the populations in the south. This divergence was due to natural selection, because large sized birds can survive in cold but the small bodied birds cannot. Due to their greater surface volume ratio, the small birds needed more energy to maintain the higher body temperature. If you remember the Boltzmann rule, I think you have studied the Boltzmann rule in ecology. You can relate to that. Another example for microevolution is the evolution of resistance. The evolution of resistance in pests to pesticides, weeds to herbicides, and pathogens to medicines, and bacteria to antibiotics, which are all examples of microevolution. Natural selection, what happens is, favors organisms which possesses gene or alleles for resistance and are able to withstand the environmental stress. A few examples of evolution of resistance which are seen in case of mosquitoes, which has developed a resistance for DDT, which is a insecticide which we use to curb the menace of mosquitoes. And we have white flies which have evolved resistance even to pesticides. Similarly, the bacteria which has developed the resistance for antibiotics. These are some examples of microevolution. Now coming to the second category of evolution, which is macroevolution. So let's understand macroevolution now. So macroevolution, which is often simply defined as evolution above species level. Very simple definition of macroevolution: Again I repeat, evolution which is above species level. Okay, in case of microevolution, what was it? It was the evolution which was below the species level or within the population level. Okay, now macroevolution has slightly different meaning to different authors. Okay, if you look into history, okay, to Stephen J. Gould 2002, okay, it meant evolutionary phenomenology from origin of species on up. Okay, this is what he defined as. This phenomenon, okay, included patterns of origination, of how the species was originated, okay, the extinction of different species, okay, and also the diversification of a taxa. So how a taxa now has diversified. So this is what he said about macroevolution. To other authors, macroevolution is restricted to the evolution of great phenotypic changes or the origin of characteristics that diagnose the higher taxa. Okay, this was according to the words of Levington 2001. Much of the modern study of macroevolution stems from the themes and principles which was developed by the paleontologist Simpson, okay, who focused on rates and directions of evolutions perceived in the fossil records, and also by Bernhard Rennes, okay, 1959, a zoologist who inferred patterns of evolution from the comparative morphology. Okay, this is a brief history on the macroevolution. Now again, if you look into the definition, okay, if you want to define it very properly, okay, you can define it as the broad basic pattern of evolution above the species level, which results in the production of new adaptive types through a process of population fragmentation and genetic divergence, is to be known as macroevolution. Okay, as I told you, it operates above the species level and results in the splitting of the population of a species into several subgroups, each of which exhibits changes in a definite adaptive direction. These changes are known as the adaptive trends and the phenomenon as the adaptive radiation, or sometimes also as macroevolution. Macroevolution includes such evolutionary phenomenon as patterns of origination, okay, diversification of higher taxa above species level, and also extinction. These patterns have developed over long periods and usually revealed by the fossil records and also by comparative phylogeny. Macroevolution operates above species level and results in the establishment of a new genera, families, or orders. These changes in the organization occur on the account of sudden mutations of larger size, which are sometimes termed as macromutations or systemic mutations, okay, according to the words of Goldsmith 1940. Now, looking into the mechanism of macroevolution, the macroevolution results in the splitting of a single lineage into many new lineages that occupy diverse habitats and find food in different ways. This is called adaptive radiation. This can also be described as ecological diversification within a single lineage. The macroevolution occurs in ecologically isolated populations which have entered new adaptive zones free of competition. In a new adaptive zone, the number of members is far less and the opportunities to avail new habitats are more. Therefore, the intraspecific struggle is roughly nil. Moreover, the new zone will be almost free from any enemies. Okay, that means there will be no interspecific competition. The newly entered population occupies all the available habitats of the adaptive zone, and its individuals start adapting themselves according to the conditions and the need of the each new habitat. It means one population which has acquired the new zone gets split up into several subpopulations, each accumulating its own mutations. All the subpopulations will again evolve independently but simultaneously in different directions on account of different environmental conditions. Adaptive modifications will occur and which will also occur in different directions. Adaptive modification in each population will have a cumulative effect and therefore is a directional evolution. Okay, so this is the mechanism by which macroevolution occurs. For your understanding purpose, there are some examples of macroevolution. Okay, so the example I put here is of a evolution of a modern horse. The modern horse Equus from Eocene till recent epoch evolved as a result of gradual adaptation for living in grasslands, feeding on grass, and running fast to escape from the carnivorous enemies. This is an example of macroevolution by adaptive divergence. The ancestral group from which the horse evolved consisted of a small browser named Hyacotherdium. Okay, it was a small one, just the size of a dog with a plantigrade feet, short legs, and teeth adapted to succulent leaves. For fast running, the limbs became long and the feet became unguligrade with hoof. For grazing, the grinding teeth got modified with large and strong crossing surface for grinding hard grass. The adaptive changes resulted in the gradual evolution of the modern horse. Okay, in this slide we have put out some characteristic differences between the micro and macroevolution. So, looking at the differences, the first differences is in the case of gene frequencies. Okay, in case of macroevolution, there is large scale changes in the gene frequencies compared to the microevolution, in which the gene frequency is very small. Also, in case of macroevolution, the process of evolution occurs over a longer period of time. So here we are talking about the geological time scale. Whereas in cases of microevolution, the process of evolution occurs within a few generation time. The third, which is the most important, is that it occurs or at above or the level of species. So what happens in case of macroevolution, the formation of new species or a subspecies which occurs in case of macroevolution. Whereas in case of microevolution, okay, it occurs within the species or within the population level only. It doesn't go above the species level in the formation of new species. Okay, the macroevolution can be said to be as an extended form of a microevolution. Okay, whereas in case of microevolution, you can consider it to be as a small evolutionary change. And also, the case of macroevolution is not been directly observed. Okay, it's basically based on the paleontological data, whereas the process of microevolution is very observable. And because why? Because it has been, the evidence is being produced by a lot of experimentation, which makes it less controversial compared to macroevolution, which becomes a little bit more controversial. Some easy examples of macroevolution is how the birds are evolving from reptiles, how the birds evolved from reptiles. That is an example in which one species, okay, one genus changed into another genus, okay, or one species into another species. That case of macroevolution. Whereas in case of microevolution is the bacterial resistance to antibiotics. Okay, it may have a resistance to the antibiotics, okay, but what happens at the end is that the species of the bacteria remains the same. It does not change into a different species altogether. You see that all the changes, the diversification and the extinction that happened over the course of evolution of a lineage, taxa, or a group are called the patterns of macroevolution. Okay, here I have listed some possible patterns of macroevolution or some theories or models of evolution, okay, which are mass extinction, adaptive radiation, convergent evolution, coevolution, gradualism, and punctuated equilibrium. Okay, so these are some patterns of macroevolution. So I'm not going to each and every details of this different patterns of macroevolution, but however in your future classes we'll be discussing more on some of the patterns of macroevolution, such as the coevolution, the theory of punctuated equilibrium, and phyletic gradualism. Okay, till then, thank you.